He's not coming back. Not this time. The words left Grace Holloway's mouth before she could stop them. A whisper not meant for anyone but the broken creature beside her. He lay curled beneath the rusted bench at Crestwood Park, ribs pressing against thin, filthy fur, ears flat, and eyes half closed in that distant way dogs sometimes stare when they've stopped waiting. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. She didn't even know the dog. But something about him, that look, that heavy stillness, made it hard to lie. He wasn't old, maybe 2 or 3 years at most. Big, brown, with a coat that might once have been a proud golden rust. His nose was dry, his paws were cracked. A thin rope of drool hung from his jaw. Grace sat on the bench, keeping her distance. The morning was quiet, just the rustle of leaves overhead and the faint chirp of birds returning for spring. She pulled her knees in and watched him. The tag around his neck was gone, just a naked collar worn to the thread. He didn't flinch when she spoke, didn't turn his head. Only his eye twitched, the one she could see. A tiny, reluctant acknowledgement that she existed at all. She reached into her canvas tote and pulled out the half bagel she hadn't finished. She broke it into pieces and tossed one gently toward him. It landed inches from his nose. Still, he didn't move. "Suit yourself," she murmured, chewing the other half. Grace didn't usually sit in Crestwood Park. Her apartment was 4 blocks over, above Macmillan's pharmacy, and she normally walked to work straight down Ivy Lane. But today, she'd needed air. Something inside had tightened after last night's call from her sister. Another update on their mother's memory. Another question she didn't have the answer to. "You're not the only one feeling left behind," she added. The dog blinked. She checked her watch. Nearly 8. She was going to be late if she didn't leave in the next 10 minutes. Still, she didn't move. After a while, she spoke again. "You know, it doesn't make you weak to hope. Even when they don't come back. Even when the food runs out and the nights get cold. Sometimes hope just means sitting still until someone notices." She tossed another piece of bagel. This time he sniffed. A low flicker in his chest. A breath she almost missed. It was something. Grace took a photo with her phone and texted it to a coworker, explaining she'd be late. She watched him for another 10 minutes, then slowly stood. As she walked away, she didn't look back. But the next morning, she returned, and he was still there, still under the bench, still silent. But the first bagel piece was gone. "So you're picky," she said, smiling just a little. "Didn't like the crust, huh?" She sat again, a bit closer. Not much, just enough to feel like they were sharing space. For the next few days, it became a pattern. She'd show up with some new kind of food, grilled chicken, leftover turkey, sometimes even peanut butter crackers, and sit near him, saying whatever came to mind. Never touching, never pressing, just being there. Others walked past, of course. Joggers, kids on scooters, parents with strollers. Most didn't notice. Some looked and frowned. "You really shouldn't get attached," warned a woman walking a Pomeranian. "They never end well." Grace didn't respond. By the end of the week, the dog's head had started lifting when she approached. His eyes followed her hand as she unwrapped whatever she brought. He didn't take food from her directly, but he ate after she left. She named him Leo, not out loud, not yet, but in her mind. Leo sounded strong, like a survivor. On Saturday, she brought a small bowl of water. On Sunday, he wagged his tail, just once. The breakthrough came on a rainy Wednesday. She had come anyway, umbrella dripping, sandwich in hand, expecting nothing. But when she sat, Leo rose. Not quickly, not fully, but enough to show he remembered her. That something inside had turned back toward life. He took the food from her hand. She didn't move, didn't speak. Just let the silence fill up with the sound of raindrops hitting leaves. He ate slowly. Then he lay back down, not under the bench this time, but beside it, closer to her. The next morning, she brought a towel and dried off the bench before sitting. She brought chicken again. Leo stood to greet her this time. She reached out, hand open. He sniffed it, nuzzled her fingers, and just like that, he was hers. Not legally, not yet. But there was no mistaking it. By the following week, she called the vet, explained she'd found a stray, asked if they had a slot. Is he aggressive? Not at all, just tired. Can you bring him in? She looked at Leo lying under her feet now, tail thumping. I think we can manage. The next day, she opened the back door of her old Corolla and let him sniff the interior. She laid a towel over the seat, waited, and to her amazement, he jumped in. Dr. Samuels was gentle. Leo had no chip. He had a healed scar on his back leg that might have come from a car accident. Signs of long exposure, but no current illness. He's lucky you found him, the vet said, checking his ears. Or rather, lucky you sat down. Grace smiled. I guess we found each other. They drove home with the windows cracked and Leo's head tilted toward the breeze. She didn't take him into her apartment right away. She had work, and he needed time. She set up a crate on her tiny back porch, laid down a blanket and some toys from the dollar store, and sat with him as he explored it. By nightfall, he was asleep with his nose buried in the blanket. Grace watched from her window. The days blurred. Leo gained weight. His coat started to shine again. He learned to walk beside her on a leash, slowly, carefully. She taught him to sit, to stay, to wait. He learned to trust the bowl of food would always be full, that the door would always open again. And every morning she sat beside him for 5 minutes before work, just watching the sky change. Then, one afternoon, she opened the apartment door. He hesitated. Come on, she said. It's warm inside. He stepped forward, one paw at a time, and that was it. He belonged. She bought a rug just for him, rearranged her bookshelf to make room for his bed, introduced him to her sister over FaceTime. He looks good, her sister said. You look good. I feel better, Grace admitted. Mom would be proud. She didn't reply. Just reached down and scratched behind Leo's ears. They went to the park still, but now together. He trotted beside her, tail swaying. Kids asked to pet him. He let them. The woman with the Pomeranian saw them once and did a double take. Well, look at that. Grace only smiled. One evening while she was doing dishes, Leo began to bark. Just once. She opened the door to see what had startled him, but there was no one there. Only the breeze. Later, when she checked the crate on the porch, she found something tucked beside the blanket. A faded red tennis ball. Dirty. Chewed at the edges. It hadn't been there before. She picked it up and turned it over in her hand. Did you bury this? Leo sat beside her, panting. Was this yours? From before? He wagged his tail. She threw it across the yard. He chased it. He ran. She laughed. For the first time in months, Grace laughed until her chest ached. And Leo, tongue lolling, ears flapping, brought the ball back to her feet. He was home now, still quiet, still slow, but no longer waiting, no longer giving up. The rain had returned, soft and steady, tapping gently against the windows of Grace's apartment. Leo lay stretched out on the rug in the living room, his chest rising and falling in an easy rhythm, eyes half closed but not asleep. Grace stood at the small kitchen counter, stirring a pot of soup with one hand and holding her phone in the other. Her thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating. It had been a good week. Better than most in recent memory. Work had been manageable, the calls with her sister less tense. Her mother, though still confused, had remembered her name 2 days in a row. And Leo had settled into her world as if he'd always belonged. He didn't bark much, didn't whine. He just followed her from room to room, sometimes pausing to rest, sometimes curling into a corner like a warm, breathing throw pillow. But something about the quiet tonight felt heavier. Grace finally tapped the screen and called her sister. It rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hey," Meredith said, yawning. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Grace replied quickly. "Sorry, I didn't realize it was this late." "It's fine. Just putting the kids to bed. What's up?" Grace glanced at Leo, who had shifted to watch her, his eyes alert now. "Do you remember that shelter near Pinebrook? The one we volunteered at during high school?" "Yeah, the one with the red barn out front. Why? Do you think they'd have records of lost dogs? Like, from months ago?" There was a pause. "You think Leo might be on a list?" "I don't know. It's probably nothing. He didn't have a chip, no tags. But the way he reacted when he found that ball, I just keep thinking maybe someone loved him once. Maybe someone still does." Meredith didn't speak right away. Then, softly, she said, "That doesn't mean you have to give him up, Grace. Even if he did belong to someone before. I know, I want to know his story." The next morning, she drove out to Pinebrook with Leo in the back seat, nose pressed to the window. The shelter was smaller than she remembered, tucked behind a long gravel drive, its red barn faded and peeling at the edges. Inside, the receptionist, a woman named Jill, offered a kind smile. "You found a stray?" "A few weeks ago. He was alone in Crestwood Park. I brought him to the vet, got him cleaned up. He's doing well. But I wondered, maybe you have a lost dog registry?" Jill took the photo Grace handed over. Leo, sitting proudly on the front porch, his coat gleaming and eyes bright. "He looks good. Let me check." She disappeared behind the desk. Grace waited, fingers drumming lightly. Leo sat beside her, patient as ever. After several minutes, Jill returned with a binder. "We get a lot of missing pet reports, but most don't come with photos. Let's see." She flipped pages, scanning each one. 3 pages in, she paused. "Here. This one's from late October. Woman named Kathy Bloom reported her dog missing near Crestwood. Large male, reddish coat. Name was Copper." Grace leaned in. "No photo?" "No, just a handwritten description. But he was reported not far from where you found Leo. Could be a match." "Do you have a number for her?" "Sure. Want me to call?" Grace hesitated. Her stomach twisted. She looked down at Leo, who had shifted closer to her, one paw resting against her boot. "Yeah," she said. "Go ahead." Jill dialed, waited, then spoke. "Hi, is this Kathy Bloom? This is Jill from the Pinebrook Animal Shelter. I have someone here who may have found your missing dog. Do you remember Copper? Yes. Yes, that's right. She glanced up. She'd like to come by. Can she see the dog? Grace nodded slowly. Great. I'll give her your number. She'll be in touch. They left the shelter in silence. Leo jumped into the car easily now, tail giving one small wag. Grace drove home with her heart knotted. She didn't sleep much that night. Her phone buzzed once with a text from a number she didn't know. Hi, my name is Kathy. I was told you might have found my Copper. I'd love to meet you both if that's okay. She read it 3 times before replying. Tomorrow afternoon? I'll send you the address. The next day was cold again. Gray clouds and wind. Grace cleaned the apartment obsessively, then gave up and sat beside Leo on the floor, brushing his coat. He leaned into her hand, trusting, steady. At 3:15, a knock came. Kathy Bloom was in her 60s, with soft gray hair and kind eyes. She held a folded photo in her hand. Hi, she said. You must be Grace. Come in. Kathy stepped inside, her eyes already on Leo. He stood near the couch, watching her, still, quiet. Oh, Kathy breathed. Oh, my heart. She held out the photo. A younger version of Leo stood on a front lawn, tongue hanging, a red ball in his mouth. Copper? She asked softly. Leo took one step forward. It's him, Kathy said, voice breaking. I knew it. Grace said nothing. Kathy dropped to her knees, arms open. Leo hesitated. Then he moved, slowly, gently, pressing his head against her shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time. Later, they sat at the table. Grace poured tea. He was my husband's dog, Kathy said. We got him together a few years ago. After Alan died, Copper became everything. We had a routine, morning walks, garden naps. Then one day in October, he slipped through the gate. I searched everywhere. Posters, online boards. I thought he was gone. Grace nodded. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. I don't want to take him from you, Kathy said suddenly. I see how he looks at you. He's happy, healthy. You saved him. But he was yours. And now he's yours too. Maybe he needed both of us. Leo lay at their feet, one paw touching each of them. The next few weeks became something new. Grace and Kathy exchanged messages, shared photos. Kathy came by with old toys, favorite snacks. Leo lit up at her voice but always returned to Grace at night, curling beside her couch or pressing his weight against her legs while she read. Spring settled over the town like a warm sigh. Trees burst into bloom. The park grew green again, and Leo ran. He ran with a joy that made people stop and smile. Grace took him to Crestwood often, walking the paths they had once sat beside. Sometimes Kathy joined them, sometimes just the two of them. One morning, a little boy on a scooter skidded to a halt near them. Is that your dog? Yes. Grace said. He looks like he has superpowers. Grace laughed. He kind of does. The boy waved and zipped off. Grace looked down. Leo was watching the boy go, tail twitching, mouth open in a doggy grin. They walked on. But one day, something changed. It started small. Leo didn't eat all his dinner. He seemed sluggish on the stairs. Grace told herself it was the heat, or age, or nothing. But by the third day, she was worried. Dr. Samuels did blood work, ran scans. The results came back with too many long words and a serious face. There's a mass near his spleen. Could be benign, but we won't know without a biopsy. Grace nodded, numb. He's strong, the vet added. He's in good shape. You caught it early. Let's see what we're dealing with. The days waiting for results were long and quiet. Leo stayed close, slept more. But he still wagged his tail when she walked in, still nudged her hand when she seemed sad. Kathy brought over a new blanket. He loves soft things, she said, tucking it near his bed. He loves you, Grace replied. He loves us both. When the results came back, the news was cautiously hopeful. Not cancer. Surgery could remove it. Recovery would take time. Will he be okay? Grace asked. He has every reason to be. The night before the procedure, Grace slept on the floor beside him. She whispered, You came back from worse. This is just another chapter. Leo pressed his head against hers, and in the morning, as the sun rose, they drove to the vet together. The operating room smelled like antiseptic and distant anxiety. Grace sat in the small waiting area of the Pinebrook Veterinary Clinic, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee she hadn't touched. Her eyes drifted between the closed door at the end of the hall and the clock that seemed to tick louder every minute. The nurse had said it would be about 2 hours. They were now past 2.5. A young couple sat across from her with a calico cat in a carrier. The woman offered Grace a small smile, but Grace couldn't return it. Her thoughts were tunneled, braced tightly around one image. Leo asleep, tongue lolling, just before they wheeled him away. Kathy had offered to come, but Grace said no. She didn't want to share this moment. Not because she didn't trust Kathy, but because this pain felt too raw, too singular. She wanted to carry it alone. Finally, the door creaked open and Dr. Samuels appeared, peeling off his gloves and mask. His expression was calm. He's in recovery, he said. We got it out. It was larger than expected, but there was no sign of spreading. Grace exhaled, shoulders slumping. He did well, the vet added. Tough guy. You can see him in a bit. When she finally entered the recovery room, Leo was lying on his side, bandaged and groggy, his chest rising in slow, steady breaths. Grace crouched beside him, careful not to touch. You did it, she whispered. I knew you would. His ear twitched. They kept him overnight. Grace drove home alone, Leo's leash still looped around the passenger seat, the silence in the car deeper than before. That night, she dreamed of the park bench. Only this time, it was empty. Leo came home the next afternoon, slower, stitched, and confused by the cone around his neck. Grace lifted him gently onto the couch and wrapped him in his favorite blanket. She laid his food nearby, though he barely touched it. She didn't go to work the rest of the week. She left voicemails, sent emails, and ignored everything else. Every 2 hours, she checked on Leo, brushed his fur, read aloud from the mystery novel she'd been halfway through since Christmas. Even her voice softened, adapted to a kind of quiet that only came with healing. By the 4th day, Leo stood without help. By the 7th, he was eating again. And on the 10th morning, he barked. Not a loud bark, not an urgent one, just a small, gruff sound as he stood beside the door, tail flicking. Grace opened it. He stepped out onto the porch, lifted his nose to the breeze, and sat in the sun. They walked again, shorter distances now, slower. But with each step, Leo regained something of his old rhythm. People in the neighborhood began to notice. "That your boy? He looks good. Glad to see him back." One evening, as the sun cast long gold across the sidewalk, they passed the park bench where it all began. Leo paused. He sniffed the grass, circled once, then laid down. Grace sat beside him. "Feels like another life," she said. "But you remember. I can see it." Leo looked up, eyes clear. They stayed for a long time. Later that week, Grace received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small thank you card, the kind you buy in packs of 10 at the dollar store. The handwriting was careful, slightly shaky. "Thank you for taking care of him when I couldn't. I was going through something terrible and didn't know how to ask for help. I never stopped thinking about him. I never stopped hoping. He looks happy. That's all I could ever want. You gave him what I couldn't. Thank you." There was no signature. She read it twice, then tucked it into her kitchen drawer. She didn't mention it to Kathy. It didn't feel necessary. Spring deepened into summer. The heat thickened. Leo napped on cool tiles. Grace bought him a new water bowl with a raised rim and a blue paw print at the base. She added ice cubes on the hotter days. He seemed to like the crunch. Their routine fell into a comfortable hum. Walks in the morning, work during the day, quiet evenings. Grace caught herself humming while she did dishes, singing along to the radio in the car. She hadn't realized how muted she'd been until her voice came back. One Saturday morning, she took Leo to the farmer's market. Vendors smiled at him. A little girl gave him a carrot. He chewed it thoughtfully. At one booth, a man selling handmade collars looked up and said, "That dog yours?" "Yes," she said. "He's got presence. Calm. Real steady. He's earned it." She bought a collar, forest green with a brass buckle. Leo wore it home. That evening, Kathy called. "I was wondering," she said, "if you and Leo might like to come visit. My garden's blooming. The daisies are taller than ever." "We'd love to." They drove out to Kathy's place on Sunday, a small house nestled between tall pines, with a winding path of stones leading to the porch. Leo bounded ahead, his energy renewed. Kathy met them with a pitcher of lemonade and a bowl of water already waiting. The afternoon passed like a breeze. They sat on the porch, listening to wind chimes and sharing stories. Kathy showed photos of Alan and Copper, old prints faded at the edges. "He always slept on Alan's side of the bed after he passed," she said. "Wouldn't move for hours, like he was keeping the space warm." Leo nudged her knee, and she laughed softly. "I think he remembers." When the sun dipped low, Grace and Leo drove home. That night, as Grace lay in bed, Leo climbed up, rested his chin on her knee, and sighed. The summer stretched out with familiar rhythm. There were days of rain and evenings of heat. The world outside spun fast, but Grace and Leo stayed steady. One night in July, the power went out. A storm had knocked out the grid. Grace lit candles and opened the windows to the sound of rain. She sat on the floor beside Leo, who was watching the flickering flame on the table. "You know," she said, "before you, I thought I was done with soft things. Love, comfort, all of it. I thought the world had taken it away. But then there you were, dirty and broken and just waiting for someone to sit beside you." Leo looked at her. "Turns out, I was waiting too." Thunder cracked. The lights stayed out, but she didn't feel alone. The next day, Grace took Leo to the lake. It was early, the sun just beginning to rise, mist hovering above the water. She let him off the leash. He ran. Not as fast as before surgery, not for long, but with joy. He splashed at the shore, chased dragonflies, rolled in the sand. She laughed and kicked off her shoes, walking ankle-deep into the water. Leo ran up beside her, soaked and grinning. She looked out over the water. Everything smelled clean. New. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, rubbing behind his ears. "But I think we saved each other." He sneezed in response. She threw a stick. He chased it. And the day went on. Grace hadn't realized how easily life could feel full again. Not the loud, overflowing kind of full that came with crowded weekends or noisy family dinners, but a quieter fullness. Like the way sunlight warmed the wooden floorboards near her living room window, where Leo liked to sleep, or how the smell of fresh basil from the kitchen made her feel like the world was generous again. They had their rhythms now. Morning walks down Ivy Lane, afternoons spent apart while Grace went to work, and evenings shared on the porch or curled up in the living room. Leo had taken to lying near the open window, nose twitching at the breeze, ears flicking at every sound. He was alert but not nervous, watchful but content. Grace caught herself narrating her day to him without thinking, talking about her coworkers, her errands, her little victories and annoyances. Leo always listened, head tilted just enough to make her feel heard. One Tuesday morning in early August, she received a voicemail from her building manager. "Hi Grace, hope you're doing well. I wanted to let you know we're upgrading the heating system this month, and we'll need access to your unit next Wednesday between 9 and 4. Also, there have been a few complaints about barking during work hours. I know you have a dog now, and he seems sweet. But if you're leaving him alone, maybe consider a dog walker or doggy daycare, just trying to keep things smooth with the neighbors. Let me know if you need recommendations." Grace stared at her phone. Leo didn't bark much, almost never. Maybe once or twice if a squirrel ran across the windowsill. Could he have started while she was away? That evening, she sat beside him on the couch, scratching his side. "Are you lonely while I'm gone?" Leo rolled onto his back. "Do you bark after I close the door? I didn't even think you could raise your voice." She looked up dog daycare options, but most were booked for the next 2 weeks. The walker services felt impersonal, and the idea of handing her keys to a stranger made her uneasy. So the next morning, she set up her phone to record while she was gone. When she got home and reviewed the footage, the first few hours were uneventful. Leo slept, shifted once or twice, drank water. Then, around noon, something changed. He stood abruptly, ears up, then walked to the door and began to bark, not wildly, not non-stop, but in short bursts, low and frustrated. He paced, circled, sat, then stood again. The barking started and stopped, and then he lay down, staring at the door. She watched the screen and felt a weight in her chest. He missed her. The next day, she took a half-day at work and picked up a puzzle toy, some chew bones, and a soft radio speaker to leave on during her absence. Still, she worried. That weekend, Kathy visited again. They drank lemonade on the porch while Leo dozed nearby. "He doesn't like being alone," Grace said. Kathy nodded. "Some dogs never get used to it. Maybe it reminds him of being left the first time. I wish I could take him everywhere. You ever think about working from home?" "I wish," Grace said. "I run scheduling at the clinic. They need me in person. But maybe one day." Kathy took a long sip of her drink. I could come by during the week. I don't mind. Just for a bit. Keeps me moving. You'd do that? For him, absolutely. They started the new routine that Monday. Kathy would arrive around 11, spend an hour with Leo, walk him down the block, talk to him like an old friend. Grace would come home to find fresh water, an empty treat bowl, and a very happy dog. One afternoon, Grace came home early and found Kathy napping on the couch with Leo curled up at her feet. She took a photo and never showed either of them. In late August, Grace decided to take a weekend trip to the coast. Just a 2-hour drive, a short break before fall began in earnest. She debated leaving Leo with Kathy, but Kathy insisted she bring him. He deserves a vacation too. So she booked a dog-friendly cottage near the beach. The drive was easy. Leo lay across the back seat with his head on a pillow, eyes blinking against the wind. The cottage was small and smelled of pine and old linen, but it had a screened porch and a view of the dunes. The first night, they walked along the shoreline. Leo had never seen the ocean. He stopped at the edge, pawing at the foamy water, then darted back when it rushed toward him. Grace laughed. He barked once, surprised, then chased a bit of seaweed. They watched the sun set from the porch. Grace sipped cider from a bottle. Leo rested his head on her knee. That night, he climbed onto the bed and pressed his back against hers like a shield. They stayed 2 nights. On the second morning, they woke to fog and the distant sound of gulls. Grace made eggs in the tiny kitchen and tossed a few pieces to Leo. They sat together on the porch steps, watching the world wake up. She felt something loosen in her. Something she hadn't known was tight. When they returned home, Leo seemed more confident. The walks had more spring. He brought her his toy duck when she came in the door, tail high. A few days later, Grace received an envelope from her mother's care facility. She opened it slowly, sitting on the kitchen floor with Leo beside her. Inside was a small painting, sloppy, uncertain strokes of a dog lying beneath a tree. There was a note. She keeps asking about the dog. We told her his name is Leo. She wanted to make this for you. Grace held the paper close to her chest. She didn't cry, not then. Just sat there, stroking Leo's back. September came with cooler mornings. Leo had grown a thicker coat. The leaves began to turn at the edges. One morning, Grace opened the front door to find a small package on the step. No label. Inside was a dog biscuit shaped like a heart and a note that simply read, "Thank you for loving him." She looked around. No one on the street. No cars out of place. She tucked the note in the drawer with the others. That evening, she and Leo sat on the steps and watched the sun slip behind the rooftops. She ran her fingers through his fur and felt the quiet peace of a life rebuilt, one brick at a time. And Leo, eyes closed, tail still, leaned in closer. Grace had always loved autumn. Even before Leo, before the loneliness that had crept into her life unnoticed, she had favored the season for its stillness. Unlike summer, which blazed with constant expectation, or winter with its long, demanding dark, fall always felt like a sigh, a gentle release before the world went quiet. Now, with Leo by her side, the season felt even more profound. They had settled into something that resembled family. Not in the traditional sense, not in the holiday dinner and photo album sense, but in the quiet, soul-deep kind. The kind where presence mattered more than words. Leo woke up with her. followed her through the apartment with his quiet paws, sat by the door when she tied her shoes. If she paused mid-sentence while talking to herself, he waited. If she felt sad and didn't say anything at all, he still knew. She started making soups more often, roasting vegetables, lighting candles even when she was alone. The radio played soft piano music in the mornings now. Leo would curl on the rug and let the light spill over him like he trusted it. Then came the letter from her mother's care facility. Not a painting this time. Not a kind note. A request. Would she consider visiting? Grace sat at her desk and reread the letter. Her fingers traced the crease down the middle. She hadn't seen her mother in nearly a year. The updates came through Meredith. The news that memory was fading. That there were moments when she forgot where she was. Moments when she became someone else. Leo watched her from the hallway, his head tilted, sensing her hesitation. "What do you think?" she asked. "Do I go? Would she even remember me?" She imagined showing up, walking into the small common room, her mother looking at her with nothing behind her eyes. Still, she went. She left Leo with Kathy that day, packed a small lunch for him and his favorite toy duck. Kathy smiled and waved her off. "He'll be fine," she said. "You go." The drive was an hour. Trees flanked the road in waves of red and gold. The radio stayed off. Grace drove in silence, gripping the wheel a little tighter than usual. The facility hadn't changed. Pale blue walls, a receptionist who barely looked up. Grace signed in, pinned the visitor badge to her coat, and followed the hallway to the common room. Her mother sat near the window, wrapped in a blanket. She was thinner. Her hair had gone fully white, but her posture was still proud, upright, regal in a quiet way. Grace walked over slowly. "Mom?" Her mother turned, eyes squinting. "Yes?" "It's me, Grace." A pause, then, "I had a daughter named Grace. Very clever girl. Liked books. Had freckles." Grace smiled. "That sounds like me." Her mother reached out and touched her hand. "Are you her?" "Yes." They sat together for a while. No expectations. No pressure. Grace talked softly about work, about soup, about the leaves. Her mother nodded, smiled, drifted. Then she asked, "Do you have a dog?" Grace looked up, startled. "Yes. His name is Leo. He used to wait at the door for you. I saw him." Grace swallowed. "You remember that?" "In dreams, maybe. But I remember." She stayed another hour, then drove home. Kathy met her at the door with Leo on a leash. "He missed you," she said. Leo bounded forward and pressed his head against Grace's legs. She knelt, wrapping her arms around him. "I missed you too." That night, they walked later than usual. The streets were quiet. Leaves crunched underfoot. Leo stayed close, but his ears twitched with each sound. He was alert in the way of dogs who had learned not to take quiet for granted. They passed the little bookstore on Fairview and stopped outside. The lights were still on. Grace had been in there maybe twice in the last year. She peeked through the window and saw a small sign. Pet-friendly reading night. Fridays 6 p.m. She smiled. The next Friday, they came back. Grace brought Leo on a leash and sat near the back. Other dogs were sprawled near their owner's feet. A teenager read a poem. An older man read from a gardening journal. Grace didn't read that night, but she listened. Leo sat like a statue, calm and observant. Afterward, the woman running the event approached. "He's so well behaved," she said. "He's better than most people," Grace joked. The woman smiled. "We host a therapy dog event here once a month. Would you ever consider bringing him? Just for company. Some of our older visitors love having the dogs around." Grace thought about Leo's calm, his presence, the way he knew when someone needed quiet. We'd love that. So they did. They started small, one Saturday morning a month. Leo would sit patiently beside an armchair, while older men and women took turns stroking his fur. Grace brought coffee and books and listened. One woman, Helen, always asked to see Leo first. "He reminds me of my childhood dog," she said, voice soft. "Only mine was never this quiet." Grace laughed. "He has his moments." Sometimes the bookstore owner would put out a bowl of treats. Leo would wait until everyone else had picked one up before taking his own. One rainy afternoon, as they were leaving, a man in his 60s approached. "Is he a rescue?" "Sort of," Grace said. "I had one like him once. Never forgot him. Died too young. But the best dog I ever had." Leo leaned against the man gently. The man's eyes went glassy. "Thanks for bringing him." Grace said nothing, just nodded. As fall deepened, the nights grew longer. Grace started bundling up for their walks. Leo got a fleece jacket, which he tolerated only because she made a game of putting it on. Thanksgiving came. Grace visited Meredith, brought Leo along. The kids were delighted. Her sister looked surprised. "You seem peaceful," Meredith said while they were washing dishes. "Leo changed everything. Mom still talks about him, you know." "I know." The next week, Grace took Leo to visit her mother again. This time, she asked permission. The staff agreed. They had therapy dogs sometimes. Leo was allowed as long as he stayed leashed. He walked in beside her, tail low but steady. Her mother sat by the window again. "Oh," she said, sitting straighter. "There you are." Leo walked forward and rested his head on her knee. Her mother stroked his ears and said, "I told them you were real. They didn't believe me." Grace sat beside them, silent. They stayed for an hour. Her mother hummed softly, brushing Leo's coat. Grace watched the light shift across the floor. When it was time to go, her mother leaned down and kissed Leo on the head. "Thank you for coming home." In the car, Grace gripped the wheel a little tighter. Leo sat calmly in the back seat. That night, she opened the drawer in the kitchen and looked at the notes. All of them. "Thank you for loving him. Thank you for taking care of him when I couldn't." She folded them together and placed them in an envelope. Not for sending, just for safekeeping. Leo lay on the rug, eyes closed. Grace sat beside him and rested her hand on his side. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and inside, everything was quiet and whole. The first snowfall came overnight. Grace woke to the muffled hush of a white world and the glow of morning light bouncing off rooftops. From her bedroom window, she watched flurries still falling, light as dust. The streets were blanketed, tire tracks invisible, footsteps erased. Leo stood at the door, tail wagging. He could feel the change. Even before she opened the door, his nose was pressed against the gap where the cold seeped in. She bundled up, pulled on his coat, and together they stepped out into the quiet. Their footsteps made the only sound. Leo sniffed the air and trotted ahead, his paws leaving perfect prints that vanished as fresh snow covered them. Grace followed, gloved hands in her pockets, breath puffing in front of her. They walked all the way to Crestwood Park. The old bench sat undisturbed under a thick layer of snow, like a memory preserved. Grace paused. Leo circled, then flopped onto his side in the snow, rolling with his legs up like a pup. She laughed. "You're ridiculous," she said. He responded with a bark and a puff of snow. Back home, she toweled him off and made coffee. Leo curled near the heater, nose resting on his paws. Outside, the town began to wake up. Plows passed, neighbors shoveled, but inside, everything was still. Work was quieter in the winter months. Fewer patients came into the clinic, more phone calls, more cancellations. Grace found herself arriving home earlier, lingering longer in the mornings. Leo never minded. Kathy visited less now, not because she didn't care, but because the roads were harder to navigate, and Leo no longer seemed so alone when Grace left for work. He had his radio, his window, his toys. He even had a bed near her desk now, when she worked late from home. One Thursday afternoon, Grace received a call from the bookstore owner. "Hey Grace, we were wondering if you and Leo would like to be part of our holiday open house. It's a little gathering next Friday. Just some cookies, music, and our favorite visitors. People always ask about Leo." Grace smiled. "We'd be honored." That night, she brushed Leo until his coat shone. She bought a plaid bandana and tied it gently around his neck. The event was cozy. Candles flickered in jars. Someone played piano softly near the door. Tables held cider, cocoa, gingerbread cookies. Children read books aloud to parents. Leo made his rounds like a seasoned host, lying near feet, accepting soft pets, blinking slow approval. Grace talked to a woman named Elaine who had recently moved to town. "My daughter says your dog helped her through a panic attack last month. She was here for a poetry reading and had a hard moment. She said Leo just came and sat beside her like he knew." Grace glanced at Leo, who now rested near a stack of cookbooks. "He probably did." Elaine smiled. "You ever think of getting him certified as a therapy dog?" Grace had heard it before, but something about the way Elaine said it made her pause. Later that week, she looked it up. The process involved training, evaluations, paperwork, but Leo was calm, obedient, gentle. Everything on the list, he already did. She called Kathy about it. "It's a great idea," Kathy said. "You two are already doing the work. Might as well make it official." So Grace signed up. They attended a weekend training course at a community center just outside town. Leo aced every section, meeting new people, walking calmly through distractions, allowing hugs from strangers. The instructor, a cheerful man named Bill, pulled Grace aside. "He's one of the best I've seen. Some dogs are just made for this. You did good with him." Grace smiled. "He found me." By early January, Leo was certified. They received a badge, a vest, and a letter of congratulations. Grace hung the letter on the fridge. Leo didn't care about the vest, but wore it without complaint. Their first official visit was to a children's hospital 20 miles away. Grace was nervous. The halls were too bright, the smell too sterile. But Leo walked like he belonged. He let children stroke his ears, rest their heads against his side. One girl, maybe 8, cried into his fur without saying a word. He didn't move. On the way home, Grace didn't turn on the radio. She just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Leo's back. He leaned into it gently. That weekend, they visited Kathy. Snow still covered the garden, but she had cleared a path. Leo bounded through it, tail wagging. "He looks official now," Kathy said, eyeing the vest. "He is." They had tea inside, and Kathy pulled out an old photo album. One page had a picture of Alan sitting in a recliner, a dog much like Leo asleep on his feet. "It still hurts," Kathy said, "but it's softer now." Grace nodded. "He loved that dog like family. I think that's why Leo took to you. Maybe he saw what you were holding in, the way Alan saw me." Leo nosed her hand. The next day, Grace got a call from her sister. "Mom's lucid today. She asked about you and Leo. You should come." Grace didn't hesitate. They arrived mid-morning. The staff welcomed them warmly. Leo seemed to remember the place and walked confidently beside her. Her mother sat in the sunroom, wrapped in a light blanket. "There you are," she said as they approached. Leo walked forward. She touched his face. "He looks strong." "He is." Her mother turned to her. "So are you." They talked for an hour, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. As they were leaving, her mother whispered, "He waited for you. I always knew someone would." Back home, Grace lit a candle and sat on the floor with Leo. She pressed her forehead to his and exhaled. Winter would be long. There would be more snow, more quiet days, more hospital visits. But there would also be warmth. Soup on the stove, letters in the mail, notes tucked beneath the door. She didn't need to know everything, didn't need all the answers. She had Leo, and he had her, and that was enough to carry them forward. February arrived with a brittle kind of cold. The snow, no longer fresh and soft, had hardened into patches of dirty ice that lingered in the shaded corners of sidewalks and curbs. The wind had lost its novelty. It scraped against windows at night and turned morning walks into quiet tests of patience. Still, Grace and Leo kept their routine. They walked every morning, no matter how cold. Grace bundled herself into layers, scarf pulled high, hat tugged low. Leo wore his fleece jacket, though some days she could tell he disliked it. His ears would flatten just slightly when she pulled it over his head. But he never fought it. He accepted the discomfort because he knew the reward. The walk, the smells, the chance to sniff the corners of mailboxes and trace the steps of squirrels long gone. On weekends, Grace began driving out to a larger park on the edge of town. It had winding trails that looped through dense woods and opened up to frozen ponds. Leo loved it there. Even with the ground frozen and branches bare, he sniffed the air like it was full of hidden messages. Grace would let him off leash in the quieter areas, and he would trot just far enough ahead to feel free, always glancing back to make sure she followed. One afternoon, as they walked beneath a canopy of skeletal trees, they came across a man and his teenage daughter sitting on a bench with a small terrier shivering on the girl's lap. The girl looked up, her cheeks red from the cold. "Is that a therapy dog?" she asked, pointing to Leo's vest. "Yes," Grace said, stopping. "What does he do?" Grace smiled. "Mostly just listens. He visits hospitals and schools sometimes. People like to be near him. He helps them feel calmer." The girl nodded slowly. "He looks like he understands everything." Grace glanced at Leo. "Sometimes I think he does." They walked together for a short while. The terrier barked excitedly, darting in small zigzags around Leo, who remained calm, letting the smaller dog investigate him without so much as a blink. Grace learned that the girl's name was Erin, and her father, David, had recently moved to town after a difficult divorce. Erin had a hard time settling into her new school, David said. She misses her mom, even though she doesn't say it out loud. Grace nodded. She understood. Leo pressed closer to Erin when they stopped to rest. Erin giggled and stroked the fur behind his ears. "He's warm," she said. "He always is," Grace replied. That night, Grace wrote in her notebook, something she hadn't done in months. She jotted down names, snippets of conversation, small observations. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Leo connects people." It was a quiet realization, but one that stayed with her. Later that week, Grace received an email from the Children's Hospital inviting Leo back for a reading session. This time, instead of just visiting patients, children would read books aloud to Leo as part of a speech and confidence program. She signed them up immediately. That Saturday morning, they arrived just before 9. The hospital had set up a small room with beanbags, rugs, and a low shelf full of brightly colored books. A volunteer handed Grace a schedule. Leo was already drawing attention. Nurses waved. A boy in pajamas squealed with delight when he saw him. Leo lay on the rug as the first child. A boy named Marcus sat cross-legged beside him with a book in his lap. He was shy, mumbling the first few sentences, barely lifting his eyes from the page. But as the minutes passed, his voice grew stronger. He glanced at Leo, who blinked slowly in return. "Do you think he likes it?" Marcus asked. "He loves it," Grace said. More children came. Some read whole books. Others showed Leo the pictures. One girl, who couldn't speak due to a throat condition, simply turned pages slowly, while Leo rested his chin on her knee. The staff brought in cookies for the volunteers. One nurse offered Leo a biscuit, which he accepted with quiet dignity. By the time they left, the room felt brighter. In the car, Grace looked at Leo in the rearview mirror. "You did good today." He licked his nose and sighed. Back at home, the wind had picked up again. Grace lit a candle in the kitchen and set a pot of stew on the stove. Leo curled on his favorite rug and watched her without blinking. She talked to him while she chopped carrots, telling him about the kids, about Marcus, about the girl with the silent story. He didn't move, just listened. That evening, Kathy called. "I saw the flyer at the library," she said. "Leo, the listener. That's what they're calling him now." Grace laughed. "I didn't know they made a flyer. You and him are getting famous. Next thing you know, you'll be writing a book." Grace smiled. "Maybe one day." February wore on. More snow, more wind, but also more laughter. Grace and Leo were invited to a retirement home, where older residents read their favorite childhood stories aloud. They went to a local kindergarten, where toddlers buried their faces in Leo's coat and shrieked with joy. Everywhere they went, someone asked where Leo came from. Grace would always answer, "I found him in the park." But what she meant was, "We found each other." One morning, Leo woke with less energy. He stood slower, moved more carefully. Grace watched him all day. He wasn't sick, no vomiting, no coughing, just tired. She made an appointment with Dr. Samuels. The vet ran tests, felt along Leo's spine, checked his gums. "He's aging," Dr. Samuels said. "It happens slowly, then all at once. He's still healthy, still strong, but don't be surprised if he starts slowing down." Grace nodded. "I just want to be ready." You're doing everything right. He knows he's loved. In the parking lot, Grace sat in the car a long time before starting the engine. Leo rested his head on her lap, his eyes soft. She whispered, "I don't care how old you get. You're staying with me." He licked her wrist. That night, she added a second blanket to his bed and bought a new joint supplement. She moved his food bowls closer to the rug and started adding warm broth to his meals. He perked up again. By the next week, he was trotting through the park, tail high. One afternoon, she came home to find a small box on her doorstep. Inside was a hand-knit dog sweater and a note. For Leo. He helped my son through his fear of the hospital. Thank you for showing up. Grace sat on the porch and read the note 3 more times. Inside, Leo sniffed the sweater and allowed her to pull it over his head without resistance. It fit perfectly. Later that night, as they sat in bed, Grace picked up her notebook again. She wrote, "He doesn't just listen. He reminds people that they matter." She closed the notebook and rested her hand on Leo's back. The snow would melt soon. Spring was coming. But for now, the warmth inside their home was enough. The first real signs of spring appeared in the form of tiny green shoots breaking through the thawing soil near Grace's porch. It had rained hard the night before, the kind of cold rain that left puddles in gutters and made the streets smell like earth. But now the clouds had parted, and soft sunlight spilled across the neighborhood. Leo sniffed at the new growth on their morning walk, giving a tentative paw to a dandelion just starting to open. Grace tugged her jacket tighter around her and smiled. The world was waking up, and Leo seemed to know it. Their path took them past the elementary school, where kids were just being dropped off. A group of children on the playground fence waved wildly at Leo. "There he is. Hi, Leo." Grace gave a small wave. One of the teachers smiled at her. "He's become a bit of a celebrity around here. We showed his picture during story time." Leo tilted his head, tail wagging slowly. At home, Grace opened the windows to air out the apartment. The breeze brought in the scent of damp soil and something sweet in the distance, maybe a neighbor's early garden. Leo stretched across the rug and rolled lazily onto his back, eyes half closed. That afternoon, she received a call from the library director. "We're organizing a spring reading festival in 2 weeks. There will be story tents, crafts, and visiting readers. We were wondering if Leo could join us for the Saturday sessions. We think the kids would love it." Grace agreed without hesitation. The days leading up to the event were full. Grace washed Leo's vest and laid it out in the sun to dry. She brushed his coat daily, and Kathy stopped by to drop off homemade dog biscuits shaped like stars. "For his fans," Kathy joked. The morning of the festival arrived bright and warm. The library lawn had been transformed into a colorful scene of canopies and folding chairs. Tables held stacks of picture books and paper crowns. There was a station for face painting, and another where children colored pictures of their favorite animals. Grace and Leo were stationed in the reading tent, where beanbags had been arranged in a loose circle. A sign on a chalkboard read, "Story time with Leo." By 10 o'clock, a dozen kids had gathered. They sat cross-legged, whispering and giggling, as Leo lay quietly in the center of the tent. Grace read 3 short books while the children took turns resting their hands on Leo's back. One little boy, maybe 6, crawled forward and whispered into Leo's ear, "My mom says I talk too much, but you don't mind, right?" Leo blinked and nudged the boy's hand. Grace kept reading. At lunchtime, they sat beneath a tree with sandwiches and apple slices. Several families approached to say hello. Leo took it all in calmly, never overwhelmed, never bored. That afternoon, a boy named Owen, who used a wheelchair, was wheeled into the tent by his older brother. Owen didn't speak, but smiled brightly when he saw Leo. Grace helped him settle beside the dog, and for 20 minutes, Owen traced his fingers along Leo's ears, his brow, his paws. "He hasn't been this still all week," the brother whispered. Grace didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say. That night, Grace and Leo returned home just before sunset. Leo walked slowly now, tired but satisfied. She filled his bowl and added a drizzle of chicken broth. He ate, drank, then curled into his bed and sighed heavily. Grace sat beside him on the floor. "You made a lot of kids happy today. You do that a lot, actually." He looked at her, then rested his chin on her thigh. The following week, the town announced an upcoming charity walk for the local animal shelter. Grace decided to participate, signing up under the name Team Leo. She sent the link to Kathy and Meredith. Both donated. When the day arrived, the park was full of people and pets. Tables offered snacks, water bowls, and branded leashes. Leo wore a little paper bib that read "Adopted and Proud." As they walked the path with other volunteers, someone shouted, "That's the library dog!" Grace laughed. "That's him!" Leo trotted with enthusiasm, stopping now and then to greet other dogs. Grace chatted with a woman who had just adopted a shy rescue named Peanut. They talked about training and routines, and how patience was everything. Halfway through the walk, Leo slowed. Grace kneeled. "You okay, buddy?" He stood again after a few moments and finished the circuit. They rested in the grass at the finish line, both sipping water, hers from a bottle, his from a bowl. That evening, Grace noticed Leo favoring his back leg. She examined it gently, found no swelling, but decided to keep him off long walks for a few days. He didn't seem to mind. They spent the time inside, napping, reading, watching the rain patter against the windows. Kathy came by with homemade muffins. "He looks content," she said, petting Leo behind the ears. "He is. Just tired. We've been busy. Good busy, though. The best kind." In late April, Grace received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small photo of Leo lying on a bench, taken from a distance back when she had first found him. There was no note, only the photo. She studied it for a long time. The way his head hung low, the curve of his back. It was hard to reconcile that dog with the one snoring gently at her feet now. She tucked the photo into her journal. That night, as she made tea, the radio played a quiet piano melody. Leo lifted his head briefly, then let it fall again. Grace stood by the window and watched the trees sway in the wind. She whispered, "You were waiting for someone, and I think I was too." Leo didn't stir. She smiled. The next morning, they returned to Crestwood Park. The trees had filled out, new leaves fluttering in the soft breeze. Children ran across the grass, and birds sang from overhead. Grace sat on the same bench where it had all begun. Leo stood beside her for a moment, then lay down in the shade. A young woman jogging past slowed, recognizing him. "That's Leo, right? From the hospital?" Grace nodded. "He helped my niece after her surgery. She talked about him for weeks. Thank you." "He did all the work," Grace said. Leo blinked slowly. As the day warmed, Grace leaned back and closed her eyes. The sun filtered through the branches above. She felt the steady rhythm of Leo's breathing beside her. They had made it through another season, another stretch of unknowns, and there was more ahead. More mornings, more people, more quiet acts of kindness. Grace opened her eyes and looked at the dog who had once given up beneath this very bench. Now he lay beside her, content, whole, and home, and everything was exactly as it needed to be. For now. Summer arrived softly, without fanfare. The kind of summer that crept in with long evenings and slow-moving clouds. The kind that made people leave their windows open and their doors slightly ajar. Grace felt it in the way the breeze smelled different, fuller somehow, carrying the scent of honeysuckle and cut grass. Leo felt it too. He spent more time near the open door, dozing in the warm light, stirring only when she passed by or when a car rolled slowly down the street. His days were quieter now. He still wagged his tail when she came home, still followed her from room to room. But his movements had become more deliberate. He stretched longer before standing, took a little more time to settle at her feet. The playful barking at squirrels had all but stopped, replaced by quiet watching. He seemed to absorb the world more than chase it now. One morning, Grace sat beside him on the porch with her coffee. The air was warm already, the sky pale and wide. "You're slowing down," she said, not accusingly, but gently. "I know." Leo looked at her, blinking, then rested his head against her knee. She reached down and stroked his ears. He still went on walks, but shorter ones. He still loved visiting the park, but he no longer ran ahead. Instead, he stayed beside her, taking in each step like a story. At the library's summer reading kickoff, he only stayed for an hour. He sat patiently while 3 children read books aloud, but when the 4th arrived, Leo shifted and leaned against Grace, signaling that he was tired. "We'll come again next week," she told the kids, offering smiles and apologies. Back home, she carried him up the porch steps. He let her. That was new. She set him on the rug and brought him a bowl of water, then lay beside him for a while. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. Birds called back and forth from trees. The sound of a screen door creaked open and closed somewhere nearby. She didn't speak. She just laid her hand over his side, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. A few days later, she took him to the vet. Dr. Samuels examined him carefully, speaking in that low, kind voice he used with animals and people alike. "He's doing well, all things considered," he said. "Older, yes. Joints are stiffer. Heartbeat's a little more sluggish. But no signs of pain. Just weariness." Grace nodded. "I think he wants to rest more. Be home more. That's normal at this stage." They drove home slowly, windows down. Leo's head rested against the seat, his eyes half closed. Grace reached over at red lights, letting her hand find the soft fur of his shoulder. In July, her mother passed. It was peaceful. Meredith had been there. Grace arrived an hour later, driving in silence, heart strangely calm. At the care facility, the staff offered condolences. One nurse pulled her aside. "She always asked about Leo," the woman said. "Even in the final days, she remembered him." Grace sat beside the bed and touched her mother's hand. It was cool, the nails trimmed neatly, the veins like small rivers. There were no words to say, no grief she hadn't already made room for. When she got home, Leo met her at the door, slow but steady. She knelt down and pressed her forehead to his. "She's gone." He stayed close to her that night, never more than a few feet away, as if he understood. The following weekend, Kathy came over, She brought lemon bars and a pot of mint she'd started on her windowsill. "I thought you might want something green around," she said. Grace hugged her. "Thanks." They sat on the porch. Leo lay at their feet. "He's changed so much," Kathy said. "He's tired." "So are you." Grace nodded. August brought heat, heavy, unmoving. Grace kept the shades drawn in the afternoons. Leo lay near the fan, his breathing shallow but even. She added ice cubes to his water bowl and turned the ceiling fan on low. They didn't go on long walks anymore, just a slow circle around the block, early in the morning or after the sun went down. One evening, as they sat in the yard, Grace noticed Leo staring at the old bench she'd placed under the maple tree. She stood, walked toward it, and patted the seat. "Come on, boy." He followed slowly and rested beside her, pressing his weight into her leg. She stroked his back for a long time. The stars began to come out. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime rang. "I think you saved me," she whispered. "Not just when I found you, but over and over again, every day." He didn't move. That night, he slept more deeply than usual. Grace woke once to check on him and found him still, paws twitching slightly in dream. In the morning, he didn't get up right away. She sat beside him, running her fingers over his fur. He opened his eyes slowly, looked at her, then closed them again. Grace called the vet. Dr. Samuels came to the house. He brought a bag, spoke quietly. "He's not in pain, but I think he's ready." Grace nodded. Her eyes were dry, not because she wasn't sad, but because she'd been preparing. Loving Leo meant being ready. She lay beside him on the rug, her hand resting on his chest. Dr. Samuels gave him the first injection. Leo's body softened, breath slowing. "You did good," she whispered. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." The second injection came. Leo didn't flinch. His breathing eased, then stopped. Silence settled in the room. Dr. Samuels packed his bag. "I'll give you some time." Grace stayed beside Leo. The room felt heavier, fuller, as if his presence still lingered in the air, holding her. Eventually, Kathy came to help. They buried him beneath the maple tree, near the bench. Grace wrapped him in his favorite blanket. She placed the faded red tennis ball beside him. Kathy said a few quiet words. Grace didn't speak. That night, the apartment was too quiet. No pause following her, no soft breathing in the dark. But she didn't feel alone. Over the next week, she received cards, notes, emails from the library, the hospital, the school. Children drew pictures. One showed Leo with wings, sitting beside a giant storybook. She pinned them to a board in her kitchen. One letter arrived without a return address. Inside was a single sentence: "Thank you for giving him back to the world." She placed it in the drawer with the others. Time moved on. Seasons turned again. Grace walked the same paths, visited the same places. People asked about Leo. She always smiled. He was the kindest soul I ever met. And every so often, she sat on the bench under the maple tree and looked out at the yard. The wind would stir the leaves, and for a moment, she could almost hear him breathing beside her. She would reach down, hand resting on empty grass, and smile. Because some stories never leave you. They live beside you, quiet, steady, like a dog who once gave up, until someone sat beside him.